everyone. Our topic for today is about the evolution of the Philippine Constitution. But before we proceed to our topic, let us first know what is a constitution.
What is a constitution? The constitution is a set of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is governed. The Constitution of the Philippines, the supreme law of the Republic of the Philippines, has been in effect since 1987. Why is it important? A constitution is important because it protects individual rights, limits the government power, provides a framework for government, and promotes stability and order. Did you know? Every 2nd of February is the celebration of Constitutional Day. It is because the latest constitution, which is the 1987 Constitution, was ratified on February 2, 1987. Only 3 other constitutions effectively governed the country: the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1986 Freedom Constitution. However, there were earlier constitution attempted by Filipinos in the struggle to break the free from the colonial.
1897 Constitution of Piak na Bato. The Constitution of Piak na Bato was provisionary constitution of the Philippine Republic during the Philippine Revolution and was promulgated by the Philippine Revolutionary Government on November 1, 1897. The Constitution borrowed from Cuba. It was written by Isabelo Artacho and Felix Ferrer in Spanish and later translated into Tagalog. The Constitution of Piak na Bato was never fully implemented since a truce and the Pact of Piak na Bato was signed between the Spanish and the Philippine Revolutionary Army.
1899 Malolos Constitution. After the signing of the truce, the Filipino revolutionary leaders accepted a payment from Spain and went into exile in Hong Kong. Upon the defeat of the Spanish to the Americans in the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1, 1898, the United States Navy transported Aguinaldo back to the Philippines. The newly reformed Philippines Revolutionary Forces reverted to the control of Aguinaldo, and the Philippines Declaration of Independence was issued on June 12, 1898, together with several decrees that formed the First Philippines Republic. The Malolos Congress was elected, which selected a commission to draw up a draft constitution on 17 September 1898, which was composed of wealthy and educated men. The constitution they produced, which was adopted by Congress on November 29, 1898, and promulgated by Aguinaldo on January 21, 1899, was titled the Political Constitution of 1899 and was written in Spanish. The Constitution is made up of 39 articles grouped into 14 titles, 8 articles of transitory provisions, and 1 final supplementary article. The document was inspired by Spanish Constitution of 1812 as well as charters from Belgium, Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, as well as the French Constitution of 1793. These countries were investigated according to Felipe Calderon the principal author of the Constitution, because they shared similar social, political, ethnological, and governmental situation with the Philippines. According to Title II, Article 4, the system of government must be popular, representative, alternative, and responsible, and it must exercise three different powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. Government secretaries were given seat in the assembly, which meets once a year for at least 3 months. Bills might be introduced by either the president or a member of the legislature. The body was also given non-legislative powers, such as the right to choose its own officers, the right of censure and interpellation, and the power to impeach the president, cabinet members, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the Solicitor General. During the periods between assembly sessions, a permanent commission of 7 elected by the assembly and given certain responsibilities by the Constitution was to sit. The President was given executive powers and was elected by a Constituent Assembly of the Assembly of Representatives and Special Representatives. The President will spend a 4-year term without being re-elected. There was no Vice President, and in the event of a vacancy, the Constituent Assembly would choose a president.
Due to the ongoing war, the 1899 Malolos Constitution was never implemented. On December 10, 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed between Spain and the United States, essentially ceding the sovereignty of the Philippines to the United States.
1935, the Commonwealth Constitution. After the Treaty of Paris, the United States of America, effectively the country's new colonizer, became the dominant force in the Philippines. Between 1898 and 1901, the United States Congress passed two actions that might be regarded as constitutional in nature. The first organic law for the Philippine Island was the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, which established a Philippine Assembly to be chosen by popular vote. According to the legislation, a bicameral legislature made up of the Philippines Assembly as the lower house and the Philippine Commission as the upper house would have the authority to enact laws. Key provision of the Act included a Bill of Rights for Filipino and the appointment of 2 non-voting Filipino resident commissioners of the Philippines as representative to the United States of House Representatives. The Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, also known as John Laws, was the second act that served as constitution. Additionally, this act clearly stated that the United States intended to renounce its control over the Philippines and acknowledge Philippine independence as soon as the stable government. With the promise of giving Filipino independence, the United States Congress approved the Hair House Cutting Act in 1932 because of the work of the Filipino Independence Mission headed by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas. The Philippine Senate rejected the bill because then Senate President Manuel L. Quezon opposed it. By 1934, the U.S. Congress had passed the Tidings-McDuffie Act, popularly referred to as the Philippine Independence Act, which established the procedures and authorization for Constitutional Conference to draft a formal constitution. The convention members were chosen, and on July 30, 1934, they convened the first time. Claro M. Recto was chosen by unanimous vote to serve as president. The draft of the Constitution was approved by the Constitutional Convention on 8 February 1935 and ratified by then U.S. President Franklin B. Roosevelt on 25 March 1935. Elections were held in September 1935, and Manuel L. Quezon was elected President of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth was briefly interrupted by the events of the World War II, with the Japanese occupying the Philippines.
1943 Constitution, Japanese Government. During the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, a new constitution was enacted. It was called a puppet government because decision and action were highly controlled by Japanese and military administration. The 1943 Constitution differed from the previous Constitution in a number of ways. For example, this version of the Constitution begins with the Republic and an enumeration of the three branches of government. The Bill of Rights was renamed Duties and Rights of the Citizen. It's also the shortest Philippine Constitution at only 12 articles. After the Japanese occupation, the Philippines was declared an independent republic on July 4, 1946.
1973 Constitutional Authoritarianism. In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected president, and in 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. With the help of government subsidies and excessive campaign spending, Marcos won re-election in 1969. The Constitutional Convention was officially inaugurated on June 1, 1971, following the election of delegates on November 20, 1970. Carlos P. Garcia, a former president, was chosen to serve as conventional president. Unfortunately, he passed away. And Diosdado Macapagal, another previous president, took over as president. Prior to the convention's conclusion, martial law was proclaimed. Ferdinand Marcos cited the growing communist insurgency as a reason for declaring martial law in 1972, which was allowed under the 1935 Constitution. He then imprisoned or exiled some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention and manipulated the Constitution to give himself more power. On November 29, 1972, the Convention approved the new Constitution, which introduced a parliamentary-style government with a unicameral National Assembly. The President was to be a symbolic head of state, elected from the members of the National Assembly for a 6-year term with no limit on re-election. The President's power was reduced to that of a ceremonial head of state, while the Prime Minister became the head of the government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The Prime Minister was also to be elected from the National Assembly. Marcos issued a decree setting the date for a plebiscite to ratify or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. However, he later postponed the plebiscite, fearing that the public would reject the Constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, Marcos held citizen assemblies from January 10 to 15, 1973. In these assemblies, citizens voted by hand on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspend the convening of the Interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on elections for a period at least several years. January 17, 1973, Marcos issued a proclamation announcing that the proposed constitution had been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the citizen assemblies. The 1973 Constitution was amended several times, all of which served to increase Marcos' power and reduce the power of the people. In 1976, citizen assemblies approved amendments that allowed Marcos to continue martial law, become prime minister, and exercise legislative powers. In 1980, the retirement age of members of the judiciary was extended to 70 years, giving Marcos more control over the courts. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French style, the semi-presidential system, but in practice, Marcos retained all the real power. In 1984, the executive committee was abolished and the position of the vice president was restored, but these changes did not fundamentally alter Marcos' grip on power. The 1973 Constitution was essentially a tool that Marcos used to justify his authoritarian rule. It was never a genuine attempt to create a democratic system of government. In the 1980s, discontent with Marcos' rule grew stronger. In August 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr., the opposition leader and Marcos' most credible challenger, was assassinated upon his return from exile. This event galvanized the opposition and led to widespread protests against Marcos' regime. In 1986, Marcos held snap elections, which were widely seen as fraudulent. Marcos declared himself the winner, but the opposition refused to accept the results. A group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, the coup attempt triggered a mass uprising known as the EDSA People Power Revolution. Under pressure from the United States, Marcos and his family fled into exile. Corazon Aquino, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow, was installed as the president on February 25, 1986.
1987 Constitution after martial law. After the overthrow of Marcos, the government of President Corazon Aquino decided to draft a new constitution to replace the 1973 Constitution, which had been written by Marcos during his dictatorship. The new constitution was designed to be truly reflective of the aspirations and ideals of the Filipino people. In March 1986, President Aquino proclaimed a transitional constitution, the Freedom Constitution, which would last for 1 year while a constitutional commission drafted a permanent constitution. The Freedom Constitution retained many provisions of the 1973 Constitution, including the presidential right to rule by decree. In 1988, a constitutional convention was created composed of 48 members appointed by President Aquino. The convention drew up a permanent constitution which was officially adopted on February 2, 1987. The 1987 Constitution established the Philippines as a democratic republican state with sovereignty residing in the people. It allocated governmental powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The executive branch is headed by the President, who is elected at large by direct vote and serve a single 6-year term. The President has the power to veto bills passed by Congress, but Congress can override this veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses. The legislative power resides in a Congress divided into two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate has 24 members who are elected at large by popular vote and can serve no more than two consecutive 6-year terms. The House of Representatives has 250 members who are elected from legislative district and serve 3-year term. Judicial power is vested in the Supreme Court and lower court as created by law. The Supreme Court has the power to review the constitutionality of law and government actions. The 1987 Constitution was designed to prevent the President from accumulating too much power and to ensure that the government is accountable to the people. It includes a number of safeguards against abuse of power, such as the requirement that the President must obtain the approval of Congress to declare martial law, and the power of the Supreme Court to review the President's actions. The 1987 Constitution is a landmark document that has helped to protect democracy and human rights in the Philippines. It is a testament of Filipinos' people, commitment and freedom and justice.
The Constitution is the foundation of our democracy. It protects our rights, ensures a fair and just government, and provides a framework for our nation's growth and prosperity. It is our duty to learn about it, defend it, and uphold its principles, and use it as a guide to build a brighter future for all.